Hi, and welcome to the Shadows and Secrets Deep Dive series. I am Kerry Savage.
And I am Samantha Skal, and together we are Shadows and Secrets, a series of retreats in an online community for mystery, thriller, and horror authors.
You can find out more on shadowsandSecrets.com. Jazz hands.
It even says that in our script.
It does.
We are both book coaches and authors, and we love talking about story. This is our series of major spoiler alert deep dives into scary books and mysteries that we love, where we talk about twists, structure, masterful misdirection, villains, and anything else that strikes our fancy about MTS, which is the overarching genre term for mystery, thriller, and suspense. But first, I would like to introduce my co-founder of Shadows and Secrets, Carrie, wherever she is on your screen.
Hello, thank you, Sam. Yes, I'm Carrie. I'm a writer and book coach, and I love working with writers to make their fictional ideas vibrantly come to life. I am super into immersive settings and details that really pull you into a book's world, which means that we are in for a special treat this edition because we've got plenty of that. But
We
before I
sure
get too
do.
far ahead of myself, tell the people a little more about you, Sam.
Oh, thank you so much. I love working with thriller, mystery, and horror and suspense authors to plan and write very twisty novels. And I especially dig brainstorming twists and villains.
Amazing. She's really good at it. Reminder, as Sam already said, we are giving everything away, including key plot points here. So if you've not read the book today, hit pause, go read it, and then come back, please.
Yes, seriously, there will be no secrets unturned. So consider this your final spoiler alert warning. The structure of these talks is the same every time we do one of these deep dives. We're going to read the book jacket copy and what the author, who is joining us today, has done to manipulate us before we even start.
And then we're going to read the first page and talk about what the author has done to manipulate us there.
And then we are going to break down each of the major twists in terms of how they did it, what percentage of the way through it happened, and what on-screen clues existed so that the twist worked.
We will also talk through how the author accomplished overall misdirection and the manipulation of the reader, and the way the author used language or setting or other elements to set the reader up for maximum fear and suspense.
Which is why we like to read scary shit. We like to be scared by fiction.
Hell yeah. All right, are we ready to introduce our
We
special
sure
guest?
are. We sure are. All right, so I'm gonna pull up. Uh-huh. All right, Tessa, you've already been on screen, so it's no secret that you're here. But today's book is The Coldest Case by the one and only Tessa Wegert. Tessa, do you want to say hi before I read the little short bio?
I sure will. Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. This should be really fun.
It is. It's going to be a blast.
You
We
know
are
it.
going to get right into it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, in case you don't know, and you should, Tessa is amazing. Tessa Wegert is the critically acclaimed author of the Shayna Merchant Mysteries, as well as the North Country series, beginning with In the Bones. Her books have received numerous starred reviews and have been featured on PBS and NPR radio. A former journalist and copywriter, Tessa grew up in Quebec and now lives with her husband and children in Connecticut, where she co-founded Sisters in Crime Connecticut and serves on the board of International Thriller Writers, also known as ITW, also known as the parent organization of Thriller Fest. Tying it all back. So, welcome,
I
Tessa.
love
We
it.
are so happy to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. You are our very first author to come on to a deep dive, and we are so excited to hear how your brain works. Um,
Are you sure you want to get involved in that? Are you
oh,
sure?
yes.
That should be the final warning, along with the warnings about the spoilers. It should be, do you really want to get inside this head?
Yes. Yes.
Yes,
It's
yes,
Because,
we
pretty
do.
wild in
Tessa,
there.
before we get into it, do you remember what you told me when I first started coming to Thriller Fest? And I was like, oh my God, these people are the friendliest people on the planet. Do you remember what you told me?
I'm sure because I say this often, it must have had something to do with the fact that we, as thriller and mystery writers, get all of our anger and frustration and everything else out on the page. So there's nothing left but like sunshine and rainbows. And I really believe that that's true. I mean, it's so cathartic, I think, for so many people writing in this space to just. For me, it's a lot about exploring the things that scare me and that frustrate me and that that I don't understand, about crime, for example, and violent crime in particular. And it's a chance to kind of explore all of that, but in like this safe little room, like I'm in
Yeah.
control of the material, right? Like we're in control of the
Mm.
material when we're writing. And so I think we can go to those dark places, but then it's out of our system and we just like jump, away, skip off into the sunset or whatever, and we're like the nicest people in the world.
We are. It's truly exceptional how nice the thriller writing community is. At the same
Right?
time, we're talking about like dismemberment and getting rid of bodies and murder. We're like, oh my God, it's so good to see. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But I think that's why it's extra fun to crack open these brains because there is such a dichotomy there, right? That everybody is so friendly, and yet we do write about this dark shit all day, and
All
think
day.
about it and talk about it and all the fun things. So yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes. hmm
100%.
Thank you for being our first victim, Tessa.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank
I
you.
mean, it's a huge honor. I'm a massive fan of both of yours. So yeah, thanks again for having me. And I was saying beforehand, I hope that I mean, I'm excited to be here, but I'm also excited to revisit this book because it's been a while for me. Like I have, this new series now, and the first book is already out, and the second book is coming out in October. So and I'll be honest, out of all the books that you could have picked, I don't know if we're supposed to say this as authors, but
Say whatever you
it's
want.
like it I think it's my favorite. It definitely is my favorite cover, and aspects of it are my favorite in terms of, aspects of the plot and the atmosphere and all of that stuff. So I'm thrilled that you picked this one, and it is such an honor, honestly, to talk with you
Oh,
about it.
well, I love this book. I have read all of your books and have had the honor of being a beta reader for you. But
Thank
this
God for
one,
Sam.
this one just it really stuck out to me because it's just so atmospheric and it felt like a good one to do. It's currently June 30th that we're recording this, and so we're entering into peak heat season. And so reading about 10 below and ice was actually kind of nice yesterday when I
Yep.
was
I
rereading
feel like
everything.
that too. I was thinking about this recently. So many beach reads are set in the summer, and that's why they're
Right.
considered beach reads. Do you really want to read that when it's, 100 degrees
Uh-uh.
outside and you're melting on your back patio? I would rather read
No.
something that makes me feel freezing cold. I think that's actually the perfect time. This is
Yeah,
the
I want
perfect
I want
season to
about
read
read about
something like this.
murder in the ice,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
yeah, the opposites.
Right.
All right, Carrie, do you want to do the book jacket or do you want me to do it?
Sure.
I have it pulled
No,
up.
I have it pulled up too,
Mm,
so all right,
rock
I'll
it.
go for it. All right. News of a missing Instagram celebrity brings senior investigator Shayna Merchant to a frozen island community of just 8 people. When the visit turns deadly, her hunt for a killer collides with a cold case she'll never forget. It's February in the Thousand Islands, and cut off from civilization by endless ice, 8 people are overwintering on tiny, remote running pine. 6 year-rounders, used to the hard work, isolation, and freezing temperatures, and 2 newcomers, social media stars Kerry and Sylvie, whose account documenting their year on the island is garnering thousands of followers and thousands of dollars worth of luxury gifts. The long-term islanders will tell you running pine can be perilous, especially for city slickers who will do anything to get the perfect shot. So when Kerry doesn't return from ice fishing one morning, his neighbors fear the worst. With the clock ticking to find the missing influencer, a police team is dispatched to take the dangerous journey to the island, but Sylvie, his frantic partner, will only talk to one person, newlywed senior investigator Shayna Merchant. Where is Kerry, and what is that Sylvie's not sharing? With aspects of the case reminding Shayna of an unsolved homicide from her past that haunts her still, she risks her own safety to help. But little does she know that a storm is coming, and if she doesn't solve both crimes soon, she may become the island's next victim.
Oh my God. It's so good.
So
So
delicious.
my
Well
first
done,
question,
Carrie.
Thank you.
great job. My first question, which we wonder every time, is did you write this or is this something that the marketing department wrote?
Actually, my editor usually is the one who takes the first stab at the jacket
Hmm.
copy, and then I'm sure it does get like a pass from someone in marketing as well. And it also will then come to me. But as far as I know, the majority of it is written by my editor. And then, yeah, and then I have a chance to review it. And I usually do make changes, but I think it's
Yeah.
such a gift to have somebody else do this because, as we all know,
I
writing
know.
a synopsis is like the hardest part. It might even be harder than writing the book itself, quite
It's so
frankly.
hard.
It's so hard. So, to have someone else come in with just a fresh perspective on things and like see the big picture in ways that I have trouble doing because I'm so close to the material. Yeah, that's a relief every time for sure. So, yeah, no.
Yeah.
So I mean, I have very little to do with that. But of course, when I submit the book to my editor, I have a very lengthy synopsis and
Mm.
that's what she pulls from, but she
Mhm.
obviously puts her like little narrative twist on things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's good. It's very clear what the story question is. So one of the things we do on these deep dive discussions is name a series of things about the book, and we try to see how clearly we can state it. So
Yeah.
story question, I would posit, is stated right here. It's like, where is Carrie and what is it that Sylvie's not sharing? And I love how clear that is. And it's also clear in the book. Like we get into it immediately, which
Mhm.
I adore. I'm a big first page murder person.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Why
Yes,
waste time
although
with other stuff? Like, let's dive right into that, discovering that body or the missing person or whatever the crime may be.
Although I will say, in my defense, because this is where Tessa, Sam, and I sometimes disagree just a hair,
Yeah.
that I like a little bit of grounding sometimes. Like, give me like the status quo so that I understand the disruption a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I do
Mhm.
think that I got it. I mean, I came to it with some knowledge. It's true, I was not a newbie to this series because I've read them all before. But even if I hadn't been, like, I did feel immediately grounded in Shayna's world, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we do the first page.
Yeah.
Um, but I also want to posit that I think there's another story question because I originally had said the same thing, Sam, as you, but I was like, but we find out what happens to Carrie relatively early on.
Oh,
Like,
that's
we
an
know,
excellent point.
not exactly what happens. Like, obviously, we the whole thing unfolds at the end where you would expect it. But
Yeah.
he's found relatively early on. So I think too there's a story question in there about whether Shayna survives or not. Because it is right
Mm.
there that is she going to become the island's next victim? So yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, we probably sense that since she's our protagonist, she's probably going to survive. But we have read books where the protagonist has been knocked off, so we don't really know. And we know like she's going to be in great peril. So that is like a big suspense question of suspense hanging over this. Is like, what the hell is going to happen to her? And then we know it's
Yeah.
even more precarious pretty early because she's not. It's not just her. She's 7 months pregnant. So
Right.
Well, and Tessa, a question for you about this series. Like, this is book 6 of 6. So, did you ever consider offing Shayna?
I can honestly say I did not ever consider that. And it was an interesting kind of dilemma that I found myself in because as I was writing this book, my editor came to me and said, "So, what's the story like, based on the synopsis that you've submitted, based on what we acquired? It sounds like this could be the last book in the series." And I kind of like hemmed and hawed and said, "Yeah, maybe it could be," but I didn't want to necessarily close the door. And I had other ideas for other books that could be set in this same region. Like, I wasn't really ready to leave the characters or the region. But at the same time, and you can see it in this book, there as the sixth in this series, and you find out obviously with book one, but it's still very present here that Shayna was a victim of this traumatic kidnapping experience, and that she has this history with the serial killer who's actually a member of her own family, and that all began right with book one, even in like kind of in Shayna's backstory. So I knew with this particular story and plot that I wanted to revisit that and tell some aspects of the story that you hadn't seen before, that even predated what happened in the very first book in the series. So yes, naturally, it makes sense that this would be the last one. But again, I didn't want to close the door on that. So what ended up happening was, because I wanted to put some distance between her and that trauma, like I had dealt with it for 6 books already in various ways, and I just felt like I had said everything that I wanted to say about it. But in Shayna's world, only a few years have passed since that actually happened. So, to be realistic, I wanted to make sure that I still was addressing it, not just like she wakes up one morning and she is fully healed and able to do her job, 100%, like no concerns about the past. So in the end, I suggested this idea for a spin-off series, and that's what I'm working on now with the second book coming out in that series. So Shayna is in it, but instead of being written, from first person point of view, she's the narrator, you're in her head, you're in her world. It's it's multiple points of view and it's third person. So it's a very different reading experience, but she's still in it. So it was kind of the best of both worlds because I put some distance in terms of years, like in her universe between the Coldest case and the first book in the new series. And then that allowed me to no longer kind of like beat a dead horse, for lack of a better expression, on that, and just kind of move on. And occasionally it comes up in this new series, but it's not so central to the storyline
Yeah.
anymore.
No, it's incredible. And I thought that you did. I mean, so Spoiler alert, people read the whole series before. We obviously have some hints if you've read this book that what happened to Bram, the serial killer, but like that was the arc for Shayna was like taking down Bram, right?
Mm,
And so you had this unique challenge writing this book, right? About what do you do when we've already conquered the villain
right.
from this? And I thought you were so clever with this, with her emotional arc and what she had to realize from this past case that so deliciously tied into her whole history and what she had to overcome to let go of everything. And like it was such a satisfying series end. I've just got to say, I don't know
Uh,
if I ever told you this when I was reading it the first time, but like it's so satisfying. Like I just finished it
Mhm.
2 hours ago and I was just like, oh God, Tessa, you did it again.
oh,
Like,
thanks, Sam.
but
That's
it
so
was
good
very
to hear.
clever.
It's so nice because there's a lot of pressure, right? Like people get so invested. So I'll tell you a story. I was just up in the Thousand Islands like 10 days ago or something like that. Very briefly, like there's a cabin up there that's in my husband's family, and we go up there and kind of open it for the season. And then we come back for a bit and then we go back for 4th of July. So that's what we're doing this weekend. And we were up there and my daughter and I went into the liquor store. Then there's like one liquor store in this whole entire town. We go in, and within 5 minutes of me being in the liquor store, a woman came up to me and said, I would have never seen, didn't recognize, came up to me and said, I just want to tell you, I still look for Tim and Shayna everywhere I go, every time I'm out
Oh,
in public. It was the first time that I had ever been like recognized in public,
oh,
and
that's so
it
cool.
happened
That's
within
amazing.
5 minutes of me rolling into town. And I was like, oh my God, it's like these characters are so real to people. And that's what I
Yeah.
sometimes forget when I'm working on it because I mean, they're real to me, obviously, but in that moment when I'm typing away by myself and in this space and I'm so in my head with the story, it's hard to forget. It's easy to forget that sometimes other people like are right there with me, and they're waiting. They're
Right.
waiting to find out what's going to happen. So I really felt like an immense amount of pressure to do these characters justice in this book. And then moving forward too, like the pressure kind of never ends because now it's the spin-off series and they're all back in the mix one way or another. But yeah, I mean it's just such a amazing experience to be able to write these books and actually see them published that I'm certainly not complaining about that.
Yeah, but
I'll
you
take that
can
pressure all day
be
long.
grateful and then
Yeah.
also have it be hard. Like those two things can
Yes,
exist at the same time.
absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I think is the case for pretty much everyone. You have those super satisfying moments where it's just like the gratification of everything just like coming together so beautifully on the page. And then you have those days when you just want to throw your laptop down the stairs and like walk away from it and never look at it again. And I honestly had some of those moments with this book, and I'm sure we'll get into this, like the structure piece of it, but the dual timeline was difficult
Yes.
for me for sure. And I think that like hats off to people who, and I'm curious to know how other authors approach it, but hats off to people who tackle this kind of structure because it really is like telling two stories kind of
Mhm.
in parallel, right? And each one has to have substance. It can't just be that one of these timelines is just filler or whatever. I mean, there really has to be something happening to drive the action forward on every page, but then you have to connect them, like braid those storylines together somehow. So that piece of it took a long time. And at first, I was writing kind of like chronologically in terms of when things were happening in the not in the story but in the book, like I knew that I needed to have this day in the present time and then this day in the past timeline, like boom 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 one after another, and then eventually that just head hopping like that to those
Yeah.
different timelines became too confusing, and I like would lose my train of thought kind of, and so I ended up just writing them separately and like slotting the pieces together at the very end
Oh,
like a puzzle, which worked out so much better because then I could stay in a single timeline the whole way through and like really follow what was happening in the story and make sure that there was enough substance and that I was like getting like the engine was like running to in the right direction, like I was getting to where I needed to be rather than just ending up with all these pages of kind of filler in a different space in a different setting or whatever.
Can I just say, like, you just valid, I'm writing a dual timeline. My
Are
draft right
you?
now is I am wrestling with a dual timeline, and you have just entirely described my experience with it. That
My
I could
gosh.
write alternating for a little while, and then it really
Yeah.
started to break down, and I needed to
Yeah.
pull it apart and look at them as two separate things, and that's what I'm working on now. So I don't know if that's something that would work for everybody, but thank you for saying that because I'm like, oh, yes, all right. I feel very seen in this
Yeah.
moment.
Oh, good. Okay. I definitely think it's worth a try if people are struggling because it's a very different way of approaching it. But if you're a
Hmm.
person who really needs to stay in the story and has trouble kind of with the big picture piece of it, and really needs to follow what's happening like kind of moment to moment, which I am, the hopping back and forth can be a challenge for sure.
Well, and I think too, because I did want to ask you about it, so we'll just skip to that right now because it
Sorry
is,
for totally wrecking the order of your
My God, no.
your
this is
questions
great.
that you
This is
planned
great.
out so meticulously beforehand.
No, as I think like it's not a traditional like one scene and then the other bouncing back
Right.
and forth, but it was woven in at such appropriate moments in the story, and I almost think it would be impossible to do it
Yeah.
any other way than you described because to what you said, like, I mean, not only does it each need to be a standalone sort of thing that works cohesively, but then it needs to weave in together. So yeah, I don't know where my question went, but it was just like I think that I you can see that in the structure of it that it's dropped in at these appropriate moments where, either you have a little bit of a break in the action because like Shayna can't be exactly where the action is happening, or because like there is something that just happened that relates back to this case that she's also trying to solve. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just really, really well timed. So,
Yeah.
Well, that
Was
you just nailed it with that description too, Carrie, because that's, I think, the big piece of it is, at least that's what I was trying to achieve. And that's what I appreciate so much about dual timeline novels that I
mm,
read as well, is it's those echoes back to the other
yes.
timeline, it's those like moments that then signal back to something that has already happened. And those are so satisfying for readers, I think. And they also
Exactly.
just, with a mystery, like those are crucial because there are elements that exist in like one of those timelines or the other, but not in both and not at the same time. So you really have to understand what's happening in both of those timelines in order to stick them together, like weave them together, braid them together in a way that really resonates with readers.
Yes. Yeah, I think
yeah.
that's so well said, and yeah, to that exact moment when we notice those moments as readers, we feel really smart, which is why it's like even more delightful that like, oh, thank you, author, for giving me that experience where I just felt like, look, I noticed that thing and I put that piece together. I mean, that is a huge reason why we read mystery and thriller and suspense, right? Is to keep our eyes out for those kinds of things, and so those little echo moments just are just so satisfying.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The question, Carrie, that maybe you had, because we often have the same thoughts, is
Mm.
what, Tessa, when did you come up with the concept that Dave was going to be your final twist?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I did know going in that I wanted there to be kind of a double twist in this one, like a twist in
Yeah.
each of those in both of those
Mm.
timelines. And it's fun to see the reader feedback because, you think that the story is over and then you get this last kind of scene where
So
there's
good.
another big reveal. Yeah, I knew early on that that was the direction I was going in. I had a lot of self-doubt about it because we've
Mm,
seen that before in a lot of other novels and a lot of TV series, like the cop that you trust, the partner especially, that then actually is the villain and was kind of gaslighting you the entire way or whatever it is. And so I really wanted to make sure that I could pull it off if I was going to attempt something like that. And I needed to find a way to make it feel kind of fresher,
yeah.
which is the other reason why I went with the dual timeline situation. Like at one point I had thought about maybe could he spend more time in the present? Could more information about that past cold case occur like in the present timeline? And what I think the part of the reason why I think the reveal is satisfying is that you don't really get any of that until he actually turns up at her front door. Like that's the moment
Mhm.
where they see each other again face to face, like they're spending time together again, in her home, which of course raises the stakes a lot.
Mhm.
So yeah, I hope that it was satisfying for readers because I feel like it came together the way that I wanted it to ultimately, but it took a lot of revision. It took a lot of editing to get the timing of it all exactly right. And the pacing is something we haven't really talked about either, but with the dual timeline, it's another thing that is another big consideration is that the pacing has to
Right.
be, you know, consistently ramping up in
Mhm.
both of those timelines. So that just adds another layer of complexity, I think, to this kind of structure. But it's a fun challenge. It was a fun challenge for me anyway. I don't know if Carrie feels the same way. Maybe
Um,
not in this moment.
yeah, it's a challenge, like emphasis on challenge.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
may not
yeah.
be feeling the
I hear
fun at
you.
the moment. But yeah, I mean, I think first of all, like 100% it landed. And I think like the reasons, at least a few of the reasons that it was working for me so well is because it was like Shayna is this really interesting character, just regardless. But like Dave was playing off of like, it's not insecurities per se, but she's definitely picking
Mm-mm.
up some like he doesn't he's feeling some kind of way about her and she's picking up on that and second guessing herself. And so I thought it was so interesting that she was doing that and not noticing all of the roadblocks that he was putting up, that it was him who was causing them. And then you have her talking to Adam this whole time and he's going like, trust your instincts, trust your gut, like that's the work that we do. And so she's wrestling with that even if she's not entirely naming it the whole time. But for me
Yeah.
as the reader, I'm like picking that up and going like, ah, I see what you're doing there. You're like having us as readers clock this stuff and say like, well, how is this all going to come out? Like, should she be trusting her instincts here? Should she be leaning into more things here? Is she right? I mean, like there's a lot of layers to that and all done in a very like it wasn't half of the story, the past storyline. So I feel like you got a lot in that very
Yeah.
compact. It was very efficient the way you used that timeline. So
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And you
Well,
also did a thing that we talk about sometimes where we have like this overhanging question that's very minor, but is actually major when we have the final twist about what happened between Shayna and Dave,
mhm.
right? Like it's introduced and it's just like we had a fight. We haven't talked for, 15 years or 5 years or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And we talk a lot in the society and in our conversations about that balancing act between not revealing something because it serves the story, but
mm,
having a very good reason to not reveal it because you don't want to just have secrets for the sake of having secrets. There needs to be a reason. And it
yeah.
felt so seamless. Like I didn't even think to question it, even though I was reading it for the whole point of like dissecting how you did all this. And it just flowed right over. And so I just want to call out like you did that so, so well.
Yeah.
And
Oh, thank you.
yeah.
I think the withholding is, withholding information from the reader is one of the most difficult things to do in thrillers, in suspense novels, because to your point, it's not keeping secrets for the sake of keeping secrets. It's not withholding information just so that the readers will continue to want to turn the pages. And it's also about like I think to really stick the landing with that, you've really got to think as a writer about when to reveal what. Like when does the reader really need to know this? And and then by that token, it makes sense for you to withhold up until that one point. But I think if you're going to do that, then you need to give them something. You need to give them like a little breadcrumb trail to follow so that you have that big satisfying reveal at the end. And that's the hardest thing about it because I read I read a lot of like I teach mystery and thriller workshops. So I read a lot of newer stuff that like, beginner kind of level, intermediate level mystery and thriller manuscripts. And the one thing that I find over and over again is that a lot of times writers will want to just withhold everything, and so
Mhm.
your opening is like the the dark night it was a dark night and we were finally there and he couldn't believe that we were finally there and she also couldn't but she had her reasons for being like it was just you're not telling the reader anything at all, you're not actually
Right.
giving them any information, so there too it's like parsing it out in a strategic way,
Mhm.
right? And so it's sleight of hand. I mean, really what this kind of writing and this particular genre, these series of subgenres, it's a lot of just sleight of hand and magic tricks and misdirection and fooling the reader into believing one thing and then like pulling the rug out from under them, which I think is one of the reasons why it's so much fun to write. And I assume one of the reasons why it's so much fun to read.
Very well said.
Yeah.
All right, shall we do the first page because this ties beautifully to what we were just talking about with the end.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right, so we have a true prologue. Thank you for having a true prologue,
Mm.
Tessa.
I'm a big fan of the prologue.
Yes, me too. All right, so prologue. East Village, New York City, 4 years ago. The dead woman was smiling, mouth tipped in a way that made her look friendly. Killer first sentence.
Yeah.
Tender, good, guesswork, I thought, but the full color sketch was strong, the forensic artist going beyond bones to animate the victim. Breathe life into what little remained. She would never smile that way again, reduced now to a bloated corpse. This woman from the water. So evocative, dude. The body had been fished from the East River, found by a man walking his Bichon Frise. I was on the catching schedule for homicides, which meant that for the next 2 weeks I'd be focused on nothing but the new case. With no ID, she'd become a Jane Doe, but I was hopeful the disappearance of a woman her age in that neighborhood hadn't gone unreported. Of course, there were no guarantees. Violent crime was still up in Alphabet City. The area was gentrified, all craft cocktail lounges and upper bohemians now, but I couldn't rule out the possibility that Jane had been living hard. Either way, she'd been abandoned, swallowed by the river like a baptism gone wrong. The medical examiner's report was on my desk, and something in it didn't translate to the sketch on the screen. Emmy's always included key details on differentiating characteristics, tattoos, piercings, disfigurements worthy of note. Jane Doe, whoever she was, possessed a facial wound. I was told the cut had been made post-mortem. My fingers drifted to my own face as I read. Jane bore a violent gash on her cheek that mimicked a seam cut undone. Squint, and she looked a little like me.
Mm.
Just, mm, mm.
So delish.
Yeah. And then I'll read like the first couple paragraphs of chapter one because this is what ties to the end so beautifully. So, chapter one, Alexandria Bay, New York. Now. No, let go. She screamed it, her voice shrill and rough. Her heel had connected with the man's foot, the knock strong enough to fold him at the waist, but it was what came next that mattered most. Only when the girl braced her hand, shoved him backward, and took off at a sprint did my shoulders ease up. Her technique was getting better, response time on the uptick too, but the message we wanted to leave her with was this: if given the chance, always turn and run. That makes no sense, the student, a freshman dusted with orange freckles, said. What's the point of teaching us self-defense if all we do is run away? The point, I replied, is that you don't always get the chance to run. The skills we're teaching you create the opportunity, provide an escape hatch. Out there, I gestured at the walls of the gym toward the wider world outside. Physical combat has consequences. Trust us, you don't want to fight, not even with decades of training. And I'll stop there. It goes on. It's amazing. Um, but the what I wanted to talk about was like again, like you have this 6 book series and you have Shayna being a badass the whole time, right? Like she's gone through hell and back and she's become this wonderful woman that she is. And you still managed to give her a like agency, power-filled emotional arc. And I wanted to hear like the pregnancy and, you know, it's a temporary disability. It sets her back. It reduces her ability to go and do the things that she wanted to do, that she was used to doing. And
Yeah.
it's such an interesting choice for a protagonist, particularly one who is conquering crime and taking down baddies, to put her in a position where she can't do the things and she feels relatively with less power. And then at the end, when she's like, Dave did it. And he's like, it's a hold I know well. And she like takes him down. I was like, I was reading it this morning and I was like, yes, because like
Right?
it's so satisfying. And your callback to pay like chapter one it was so good. And I just want to slow clap for the emotional arc on top of an emotional arc for the whole series. And she has this moment where she goes back to New York and faces the bar and is terrified and has like, a panic attack, very understandably. And
Hmm.
then progressively feels like with less and less power. And then you give her that power moment at the end. And I just, mm.
Yeah, it
Anyway,
was
was that on
satisfying.
purpose?
Yeah,
So
yes.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because at this point, there's a couple things going on. Like the flashbacks, that past timeline, that's really her origin story, right? And again, that's not something that you learn as a reader, even if you started the series from the very beginning. There's a lot of information, especially in book two, The Dead Season, about her relationship with Bram and how she got the scar and, all of that stuff. But you don't know up until this book what her early experience working as a homicide detective what the NYPD was like, and the challenges that she faced during that time, and why she approaches investigations the way that she does now. So part of, wanting to do that dual timeline and those flashback scenes was to express that to the reader in a way that they wouldn't have experienced before. And then the other piece of it was, by book six, she had there is a distance between her and that trauma. And to Sam's point, well, maybe I shouldn't spoil book three as well in the process, but there's something that happens in
Read them
book
all.
three that, I mean, we already know that Bram is dead by the time we've reached this point, right? Like the villain that she had been kind of pitted against over those first few books in the series, and that really like shaped her life and her need to work in this profession is gone. And then for a couple of books after that, he still lingers in a kind of psychological way, like she doesn't feel like she really has the complete closure that she wants with him. But there is increasingly distance between her and that initial trauma and her challenge, facing him kind of in a like direct combat situation. And now that she's pregnant, I mean, I basically got to this book and thought I have to put another obstacle in her path because it's just getting too easy for her. She's doing a little too well. She's married, she's so happy, she's settled now in the community and in her troop. And the last investigation was before this book, Devil's at the Door, was very personal for her. And that resonated with me as I was writing it. That felt like a direction that I wanted to continue to go in, where the stakes felt really personal. And that's a theme, obviously, throughout the story, too. Like family. We said we weren't really going to talk about themes, but now I'm going to talk about themes. Just to say that family is a big theme. And not only that, but like the distrust within families and the way that families can betray you is a big theme. And so that was a theme in the previous book too. And then when we get to this point, it was more like, you know, it's all about her family now. Everything is about her family. And she's still very much devoted to her job and committed to the community and protecting them and all of that. And going out there and figuring out what happened to Carrie, obviously. But it's really, this whole book is really about her wanting to just protect the baby, make sure Tim is okay. And instead, I had to have her go out on this ice that might crack and the river might swallow her up at any moment. And that, once I decided that I wanted this book to be set in the winter too, I mean, it just felt like a natural decision to have her in this very precarious situation time and time again. Sometimes readers say to me, I could not believe that she went out there again. Like she didn't have to leave the mainland. Why didn't she just stay home? Tim is fine. Val's out there. He's got help. But, what kind of story would that be? And when you're writing from the first person, obviously she has to go out there. She has to be in the mix because otherwise there's no story to tell. It has to be told through her lens, right? So I needed to throw her into the fray time and time again.
But I loved that tension throughout the whole book too, of like she's like trying to convince herself like, all right, I need to take it easy. I'm not only thinking about me, even though I always want to step into danger, I always want to do the thing. And like, but ultimately that does win out, right? Her need to get back out there and be in the moment and do the thing. Like, I mean, she's not like completely throwing caution to the wind, but she's definitely stepping back into that situation, which I would think if she didn't, I would have been like, that's not Shayna. Like, that's not who this character is. So it felt like a true decision for her to me.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you feel that way. And also, let's be real, she doesn't make the best decisions all the time. She's definitely a messy character. She's a bit of a mess. I mean, there in previous novels in this series too, she's done some things that even surprised me where I thought, girl, this is a terrible idea. What are you doing? Like, dial it down, you know what I mean? But that I think is one of the things that makes her interesting. At least it makes it interesting for me to continue to write her because I just don't know which direction she's going to take things in. And we all make questionable decisions sometimes. And especially when you have a complicated family history and a complicated past, how can anyone make the right decision all the time? Going into writing this series, which I will say I didn't ever intend to write a series. I wrote the first book, Death in the Family, as a standalone and then had the opportunity to turn it into a series, which was great. But all I knew going in was that I wanted to write a detective that was flawed, but not necessarily flawed because they had their own personal demons. Like it was more about external forces that were like, forcing her to deal with her past and aspects of her life that she really didn't want to even face or tackle or anything. And so, I mean, it wasn't going to be like the detective with the alcohol problem and the bad, relationship with his wife or her husband or whatever. But I did know going in that I wanted her to have like this really messed up background that she had to kind of overcome. And
Mm.
then, lucky for me, when I had the opportunity to turn it into a series, that gave me tons of fodder to explore from one book to the next because her problems just are bottomless, honestly. Like, I could
Yeah.
say a lot more about her mother and her cousin and everybody else. And so maybe someday I will, because now I have these other books that I'm still digging into her character in these other books, just doing it in a very different way.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love a
Okay.
cinematic universe moment. I think a
Oh
lot
my
like
God.
that seems to be like something that I see a little bit more and more. And I think it's because we as readers really love to inhabit these worlds and we are invested in these characters. So even if she's not the character, like it's like, oh, hey, yeah, I know her. And I feel
Yeah,
smart because there she is and I know her whole backstory and all that good stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we're so invested with her and she's so likable, but about because we understand why she's doing the things she's doing. Like we talk about this a lot on our discussions is the translation and the interiority and one of the standout translations I thought you had was describing she didn't personally realize how scary it was to cross the ice in the winter, right? And like, you hear about an airboat and you're like, it's a boat. It can cross the ice. That should be fine. But then she has to have someone tell her, like, no, no, no. Every time someone crosses the ice, like it's a miracle they survive, basically. Like it's terrifying. And the stake setting just immediately, it like ramps the tension. And then it's like every time she has to go out, it's even worse. But the thing I want to hear about is this Christmas tree thing with the beer cans. Is that real?
I thank you.
Yes.
I had the same question.
That is real. So when I was researching this book, a lot of research goes into these books in terms of stuff like police procedure, because I mean, we all know every town has kind of a different approach when it comes to police procedure. They have like a bit of a different law enforcement structure. You have a sheriff or you don't. State police is called in or it isn't. It depends on the size of the town and the city and whatever else. And so already, when I'm dealing with an area that has a lot of geographic challenges, there's a lot of research that goes into that because of the water, because of the proximity to Canada and the Coast Guard's involvement, and it's complicated. So, normally setting is not something that I really have to put much effort into researching because I spend a lot of time up in that area, which was one of the reasons, pretty much the main reason why I wanted to write a novel to begin with that was set up there. It was very familiar to me, very atmospheric and kind of like cinematic to begin with, lots of interesting history, like interesting kind of socioeconomic dynamics between the locals and the wealthy summer people who spend time up there. All of that stuff kind of led me in that direction. But then, when I started writing this book, I had only been there in the summer and early fall. And so I did go there right away. Like when I started working on this novel, I went up there, in November or something like that. I think I did a book event up there actually for the previous book. And the water was not frozen. It wasn't even that cold. It wasn't snowing. So it was like, I don't want to say kind of a useless endeavor because definitely I got some ideas while I was up there, but it didn't help me at all when it came to understanding what it's like up there in the winter. And then someone who came to a book event introduced me to this guy. He was actually a member for years and years of the Clayton Fire Department. And so he could give me a lot of insight into that aspect of things as well, because obviously, the fire department plays a role with the airboat and everything. But then he also was a guy who had overwintered for many years on the small little island next to Running Pine. And Running Pine is not a real island, but Grindstone Island is. And Running Pine is like a carbon copy of Grindstone Island. But, and as much as I try to not fictionalize stuff and have, you know, areas and islands and businesses and whatever as accurate as possible in the book so that readers can recognize the area because that's part of the fun of it for me. If there is a place that a crime occurs, I do
Right.
fictionalize it because I don't, you know, I don't want to mess with the locals, honestly. They buy a lot of books. I don't want to make anyone mad. So I ended up changing the name of it, but it's exactly like Grindstone Island. And this guy had spent several winters on the island right next door. So he started telling me these stories. I did several 2 hour long calls with him. And one of the things he told me about, which is also in the book, is this story of somebody coming out. At one point, there was a group of kids that lived on the island and they had to commute to Clayton to go to school. And there was like a, you know, squall, snow squall or whatever, blizzard, and he had to come out and fetch them by snowmobile to take them to school. And they got like turned around in the squall and they couldn't find where they were going. That is a true story as well. They ended up all being fine and making it to shore. But yes, the Christmas tree story is something that he told me, and this actually did happen for years and years. It's been a few years since the river has frozen over completely, like completely solid. But I mean, he told me very sadly about several people that he knows who in recent years tried to get out there in the winter and drowned, you know, because their snowmobile came through the ice or they hit like a huge chunk of ice with an airboat or something, whatever the case might be, or they were walking. I mean, a lot of times people just think, oh, I'll just walk across. But you know, the water is constantly flowing and there are the soft spots and everything. It's extremely treacherous, which yeah, I mean, lucky for me as an author because of course immediately the stakes are going to be super high. Immediately you know it's going to be like a life or death situation and she's got to get out there because that's where the crime is. That's the crime scene. She really has no choice. So
Yeah.
that worked well for me. And the atmosphere was a piece of it that I really wanted to play up in this book because I think, as you said when you read the bio earlier, I grew up in Quebec, which is like insanely cold for anyone who has ever spent time I grew up in the eastern townships of Quebec, actually, right where Louise Penny's books are all
Hmm.
set, like
Oh, fun.
2 towns over from Knowlton, which inspired the town of Three Pines. So, I mean, it is ridiculous. And I grew up cross country skiing and like hiking in the woods and all of that stuff. So I was very familiar with the feeling of your nose hairs freezing the second that you walk outside and all of like just like the burning feeling on the tips of your ears and your fingertips where you know I'm probably getting frostbite right now. It's happening. There's not much I can do about it. So, yeah, I wanted to really lean into that with this particular book, even though I enjoy writing description with all of everything that I write. This one was really extra fun.
Oh, it was so fun. And you have this like locked room thing
Yes.
where we also have, some back and forth, but again, it's so treacherous to get back and forth. And the isolation research, like that was so eerie, like
Yeah.
wondering if Sylvie actually has completely lost it, and then finding out that no, she had a real good reason for being scared, and like here's what everyone was actually up to. Like it was just very delicious. I just really enjoyed their
Yeah.
little 8 pack of people that, they keep dying.
Well, the closed, and that's another thing that actually does happen. Like, this whole closed circle of suspects narrative, which I'm a huge fan of. And I did it with the very
Yeah.
first book, and I really wanted to revisit it. Whether this was going to be the last book or not, I really wanted to revisit it at some point. But there really is on the island, on Grindstone Island, a group of people still to this day who overwinter there, and it's usually somewhere between 6 and 10 people. There have been kids, like I said, over the years, older people. Sometimes it's like a bunch of cousins out there. I mean, it really depends on, it's a very small community, but everybody, much like in the book, a lot of people have like deep ties to this area. Their ancestors owned the land, for hundreds of years before them. And yeah, so then that created, of course, the opportunity to do this closed circle approach where, is the killer on the island? Is he not? And then because that's been done so many times, then I wanted to try to find a way to make it feel like a little fresh again, where, the actual killer is connected in some way, but maybe not present all the time. And just kind of like perhaps pops up right toward the end again, just when you kind of forgot he existed.
Right. Well, your manipulation of the reader through Shayna, when she encounters Steady Teddy, that's his name, right?
Yep.
Like
Mhm.
his name even is a misdirection. It's just
Yeah.
like, hey, look over here at this stable firefighter, and we trust firefighters immediately,
Right.
always.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so we're just like, oh yeah, no, he's the airboat driver. This is great. She's going to be safe. And like in no way do we think to question what he's doing. And that was also just really, really well done because what a perfect misdirection, right? When he pops up at the end, like I've read this book now 3 times and I had forgotten that he was the villain. And so when it popped up, I was like, oh my God, it's him. Like, how did I miss this? It's just you did a really good job.
Well, and I
Well,
think
that's
that
where
no, go
I
ahead.
was
Sorry.
just going to say, I don't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to say real quick, that's where beta readers are worth their weight in gold because people like Sam, who you need to have fresh eyes on it to know if it's working, right? You need to
Mhm.
know, and I think it's so hard to know as the author whether or not the timing is right of that reveal and whether you tipped your hand too soon and said too much about that character early on in the book. Like it's such a fine line. So to
Yeah.
have experienced readers take a look at it and go, no, I was surprised. That is, yeah, I mean, I would never ever submit anything to an editor or agent without beta readers. I really would never do it.
Uh,
Mhm.
words to live by. Carrie, what were you
Yeah.
going to say?
No, I was just gonna say, like, I had one of those lovely moments, which is I think what we're all striving for when we're writing, of like as soon as Teddy popped up, and even before she referenced back to it, it was like just before she referenced back to it, Shayna did. I was like, oh, the moment at
Yes.
the boat where we think, oh, she's reacting to Rich and Ewan because of course she is, because
Yeah.
we're very suspicious because we were with Shayna in that moment, thinking like, oh yeah, of course, like they were the last two with Carrie, so of course we're all suspicious of them. And then and then to know like that the way it unfolded, it was really, really satisfying. So thank you for giving us one of
Oh,
those
good.
very
Yeah.
satisfying moments.
Thank
Very
you.
Well, and
surprising. And yet it all fit together when you look back, which is what we're all striving for, right? To think like
Right.
it was right there, but so it doesn't feel like a cheat at all. And that's the big thing too. We don't want to ever just like pull a rabbit out of a hat.
Exactly.
But well, we kind of do, but not like it's, I guess, the rabbit goes in the hat and like we're not pulling a chicken out or something like that. Because
Yeah.
where did that come from? No, it was all there. It was all laid out for us. We could have seen it, but nope, it
Yeah.
was just like, no, look over here for a little bit instead. So,
yeah. Well, we here at Shadows like to define twists as assumptions that the protagonist makes or the POV character makes that are then proven incorrect. And
yeah.
Shayna
I like
makes
that.
all these very logical assumptions throughout the book. We follow along. We're like deeply suspicious of the entirety of the island, with the exception of maybe the kiddo.
Yeah.
And, it's just like, we're like, oh no, they definitely did it. They just wanted them gone. They don't like Instagram. They don't like progress. Like,
They don't
they
want their
wanted,
island to be overrun with
yeah, like they don't want the
tourists.
tourist influx,
Yeah.
whatever. All of that was so believable. And so when the
Mhm.
truth is actually revealed and through Shayna, we see, and as Carrie just said, like, we have Shayna remember just at that moment. And so we, the reader, are like, no, 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 it's Teddy Teddy. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's just like it's so satisfying, and the misdirection was just chef's kiss.
Yep.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Yeah. Well, Tessa, any sort of like pieces of advice that you have for writers on the journey of, we are learning our craft, we are serious about, improving our craft to the point where we ultimately, hopefully, fingers crossed for everybody, get published someday. Anything you wish to share with us about your journey and what you wish maybe you had been told at the beginning of your
Mm.
career?
Ooh, good one. Yeah, actually, two things come to mind. So the first, everybody who's here is already absolutely crushing, is find a community of felt like connect with fellow writers. It is, I mean, I can't believe how many years I tried to do this all on my own, which is probably why it took so many years before I wrote a book that actually, got me an agent and sold. And that first book I wrote was not the first book that I sold. It was like I think I wrote three entire books after that and revised that first one like 5 times. So, it can take some time, but it was the point at which, like during that whole experience was when actually made an effort to connect with other writers, and then and like go to events and stuff like that and just meet people who were at completely different points of their career than where I was. And everybody is always so generous and willing to, give you free advice and help you like steer you in the right direction. And I mean, there were things that I was told that were like a bit terrifying. Like I was with my first agent for several years before any of my books sold. And once a very, I won't say who, but a lovely and very well-known almost Pulitzer Prize winner, like Pulitzer Prize nominee told me, I
Wow.
think, you've been with this agent for long enough that you should probably cut and run because if she hasn't sold anything at this point, like it's probably a sign that it's not going to work because she signed you because she had like faith in your ability to write, and if it's not working it might be a her problem, right? And so then for a while I kind of spiraled and wondered if I should get a new agent, and if that was the issue. That wasn't the issue. It was really just the book. Like I wasn't writing books that there was a market for at the time. I was writing these bio thrillers that I think like could have sold in the 90s. And even though I still like to read those books, there really wasn't any, weren't any publishing houses really looking for that kind of thing at the time. And so it was when I actually hit on mysteries that and wrote Death in the Family that actually took off. But I'm like totally going off course here. But all of that to
We
say,
love it.
my first piece of advice is find a community. I mean, even though that piece of advice ended up like I didn't follow it, it all ended up being fine. Lots of other writers would, then became my beta readers, and we kind of talked about like which agents have you had an experience with, or that you would stay away from for one reason or another that you really got like good feedback from, and it just to have that hand to hold on to as you're stumbling around in the dark, because that's what it feels like, as many people here probably know, is amazing. And then the other piece of it I would say is trust your instincts. Like a lot of times when we have trouble with a project that we're working on and we feel like we're banging our head against the wall, it's probably because we're trying to force something that shouldn't be actually happening in the story.
Mm.
And a lot of times I will do that because I think that it's a great idea and I want to see it through, and it's not working and it's not working. And, my instincts are telling me to pivot and I don't listen, and I waste a lot of time that way. So I would say, if your gut is telling you this just doesn't feel right, or you've been working on something for a really long time, change the tense, or like change the perspective of the person who's in the scene. Like have the scene written, if you're doing a multi-point of view, have write that scene from a different perspective. Sometimes just like mixing it up that way, because your gut is telling you like the approach that you've been trying to take isn't working, can be the thing that kind of helps you power through that roadblock.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like
Yeah,
Shayna would really
incredible.
appreciate that advice too about listening to your gut.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, she sure would. All right, well, that wraps up our public part of the deep dive. Thank you so much, Tessa.
Yeah, thank you,
We are
Tessa.
so thrilled to have, I'm going to show the cover again just so we have a screenshot of it, but we're so thrilled to have talked about the coldest case today.
So
And
much
we
fun.
love, love, love having you on. So thank you all, internet, who is watching this for joining us. And we will stop the recording and then we will enter into our private discussion. So,
Sounds
Bye,
good. Thank you so
everybody.
much.